Welcome to Vivid Box HQ, where we unpack the geopolitical story behind tomorrow's headlines. Today, India just placed the biggest energy bet of the decade. And in 3 days, the rules expire. Let's begin. At dawn off the coast of Gujarat, a tanker called the Stratos sits low in the water, its hull bearing 700,000 barrels of Russian crude that should not, by Western law, exist on this side of the world. Behind it, 12 more tankers wait their turn. The captain doesn't know it yet, but his cargo is part of the biggest oil rush nobody on cable news is talking about. Because in 3 days, a piece of paper signed in Washington expires. And when it does, India's decades-old energy strategy, the one that's kept the world's most populous democracy fed, lit, and running, could unravel in a single afternoon. This is the story of a deadline. And a gamble. Here's the thing nobody told you. Back in mid-April, the U.S. Treasury quietly issued an extended waiver permitting Indian buyers to keep purchasing Russian oil at sea, despite the sanctions still nominally in place. It wasn't a gift. It was a hostage negotiation. With Brent crude flirting above $100 a barrel after the Iran strikes, Washington needed Russian oil flowing, just not officially. That waiver dies on May 16th. Today is the 13th. And right now, at this exact moment, Indian refiners are scrambling to load every last barrel before midnight on a deadline they didn't choose, in a war they didn't start, with a discount that's already disappearing. Rewind to 2022. When Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine and the West slammed the door on Russian oil, India did something audacious: it walked right in. By late 2025, Russia was supplying roughly 34% of every barrel India consumed. By early this year, that number jumped to 45%. The math was beautiful. Russian Urals crude was trading at a $15 discount to Brent at the end of last year, sometimes ballooning to $31 per barrel in early March. Multiply that by hundreds of millions of barrels a year, and you're not talking about an energy policy anymore. You're talking about an entire national budget. A lifeline. A subsidized industrial revolution, paid for by Vladimir Putin's invasion. And then, June. U.S. and Israeli jets hit Iranian nuclear sites. Within 72 hours, the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point where 1 in every 5 barrels of global oil passes, came within hours of closing entirely. International analysts called it the largest oil supply disruption in history. Brent shot above $100. In Mumbai, refining executives didn't sleep. Because India doesn't just import Russian oil. It also pulls roughly 40% of its crude from the Gulf, Saudi, Iraqi, Emirati barrels that all have to thread that exact strait. Suddenly, Russian oil wasn't just cheap. It was the only crude that didn't run past Iranian missile range. Suddenly, the gamble made even more sense. In a glass tower in Bandra Kurla, Mukesh Ambani's analysts ran the numbers. Reliance Industries, India's largest refiner, the company that turns crude into the diesel that moves the country, had been the biggest single buyer of Russian oil on earth. In October, when Washington sanctioned Russian energy companies, Reliance blinked. They announced they'd halt purchases from their largest Russian supplier. But state-owned refiners Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, they hesitated. Then the discount widened. Then Hormuz nearly closed. And quietly, without a press release, the tankers started arriving again. The private giants playing chicken with sanctions. The public giants praying nobody notices. Look. Narendra Modi is now caught in the kind of bind no prime minister wants. On one side, Donald Trump, threatening secondary sanctions on any country still trading with Moscow. On the other, Vladimir Putin, offering the discounts that keep Indian inflation tame and the rupee stable. And running through the middle 800 million voters who'd noticed the second petrol hit 120 rupees a liter. Modi can't say no to Putin. Can't say yes to Trump. So he says nothing. He buys time. He buys barrels. And he hopes that the waiver gets renewed before May 16 becomes the day everything broke. So what happens if it doesn't? First, refining margins collapse. The cheap Russian crude that made Indian refiners among the most profitable on earth disappears overnight. Second, the rupee weakens. India's current account deficit, currently manageable, balloons as the oil import bill jumps sharply. Third, and this one matters most, the entire architecture of post-2022 sanctions starts to wobble. Because if India walks away under American pressure, the G7 price cap survives. But if India doesn't? Then Trump faces a choice. Sanction the world's largest democracy. Or admit the sanctions never had teeth. And here's the wild part. Europe is watching too. The EU was supposed to introduce permanent Russian oil ban legislation on April 15. They delayed it, citing current geopolitical developments. Translation: with Hormuz on fire, nobody can afford to cut off another supplier. The same week Brussels blinked, reports indicate Beijing quietly stepped up its Russian crude lifting. The price cap regime isn't dying with a bang. It's dying, one waiver at a time. 3 things to watch. First, Saturday, May 16. If the Treasury extends the waiver again, India breathes. If they don't, expect tanker movements off Gujarat to telegraph the answer within hours. Second, the OPEC Plus meeting at month end. If Riyadh signals an output cut, Brent climbs, and the political math shifts again. Third, watch what China does next. Because if Beijing front-loads imports too, the message to Washington is unmistakable. This isn't an India problem. This is a price cap problem. And the cap is already cracking. That's your VividBox HQ briefing. If this changed how you see what's coming, hit that like button. Share it with one person who still thinks oil is just oil. And subscribe so you never miss tomorrow's story. See you tomorrow.